To this now, the Finance Minister, Godongwana, has delivered the final budget of the country's sixth administration as we head into an election this year. For some budget shortfall, Godongwana has proposed withdrawing on the gold and foreign exchange Contingency Reserve Account. This is an account that is held within the Reserve Bank. Our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, asking him why this move and why now?
We have been waiting for long. We've been waiting for long. If we look at the budget review, that number has always been in our books for long. Even if we did it earlier, this question would have arisen. We've been waiting for long. What we are creating now, because it's uncharted territory for us. Together with the Reserve Bank, we've looked at international practice. We brought in the IMF and other people to work with us. What we're creating is a framework. What does that framework do? That framework will say we're not going to have any major discussion. We'll be guided by the framework. We'll do an assessment of the contingency reserves on an annual basis and draw cash if it's the problem now. We didn't have a framework. Now we have a framework. Moving forward, it's going to be an easy thing to do.
Well, let's get reaction now to the Finance Minister's budget. We speak to Lisette Ijssel de Schepper. She is a senior economist at the Bureau for Economic Research at the Stellenbosch University. Lisette, good evening to you and thank you for your time. Let me begin with what stood out for you from this budget.
Well, I think the biggest announcement was what you were probably talking about earlier, the JIFERCA call. Well, we were expecting something on that. I think the amount, 150 billion, is quite significant. And the entire budget sort of hinges on this working out well. The improved, especially over the longer term, the improved debt to GDP metrics all hinge on this 150 billion rand being used properly. Now, some of the details that we would have liked to see are still lacking, and the proof will obviously be in the pudding once this is being implemented, once this framework that they are talking about becomes more clear. But I think that really was the most important announcement that we saw in today's budget.
Well, let's perhaps drill down then into why this decision, the Finance Minister using the words, "We are in uncharted territory." Is that his way of basically admitting that government debt has reached levels that are simply too dangerous now?
Well, debt levels are certainly very high, and the way that Treasury projected them increasing prior to this announcement was skirting to even higher, slightly, as you want to call it, dangerous territory. I think it is important, though, that we do see this as sort of I don't want to say a one-time intervention, but this is not a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that is going to be there every time that we run into fiscal issues to help us out and to, provide us with some additional revenue. I think the long-term fiscal consolidation plans need to remain in place. The structure to cut back expenditure, to cut back wasteful expenditure while trying to find more revenue sources has not changed, even with this additional sort of source of income.
Well, the opposition are going to differ with you. In fact, they've already done that, because when you say this is not a pot of gold that we're going to constantly dip into whenever we get into trouble, the DA is saying, and they're using a very strong word, they're saying this is a raid of these contingency reserves, and for them, we've started this and it is going to continue. Although I will caution that we were reminded that in 2003, this was done as well.
Yeah, I think it is also important to realize that it's not necessarily the reserves, but sort of the unrealized profits that were made on these reserves. Now, the way we made profits was due to the rand weakening, so it's not necessarily that we did something very well. So in other methods and countries, this is being used. The question is just how you are going to use it. If you would just basically pump this into the economy, it could actually have an inflationary impact. If you don't fund the Reserve Bank for the cost that it's going to incur to release this, that could create all sorts of problems. So the practice of using it as isn't necessarily a bad idea. The way that it's going to be used and the way that guidelines and guardrails are going to have to be put in place on how it can be used going forward, that is going to be the important part.
Let's move on to personal income tax. No hikes there, but will taxpayers make up for this in other ways?
I think the taxpayers will most certainly feel it, given the bracket creep. So if you had a salary that was increased last year linked to inflation around 6 to 7%, you might have been bumped up to a higher tax bracket now. You're also going to be paying more tax over that slightly higher salary. What you see in years where there's less pressure on the fiscal, these tax brackets also get adjusted by inflation. So what you would be paying in tax stays relatively the same. This time around, that certainly isn't the case. So while your tax rate might remain the same, what you'll end up paying to the fiscus is going to be significantly higher. The sin taxes, of course, have also been increased, most of them with more than inflation. So we're going to feel that. But where we see some relief is on the fuel levy, where we were expecting another increase. The fuel levy has remained unchanged. So I wouldn't agree with the statement that that is putting money back into our pockets because it's money that we haven't spent yet, but it is helping us a little bit this year.
Well, let's conclude with Transnet. Its perilous financial state, which is impacting on the country's rail and port services, it has not received any extra funding. Was that a good move, you think?
I think down the line, rather, we will see extra funding flowing towards Transnet, but I think Treasury is making and being quite firm that any money flowing towards Transnet and the logistics sector needs to be paired with broader reform of the sector. We can't just be throwing good money after bad. I think we've learned our lesson with Eskom and some of the other SOEs of late. So I think Treasury in general is just standing quite firm that they're there to help, but then reform needs to happen. Changes need to happen. They don't have extra money lying around that just can bail out institutions, whether they're state-owned or private.
Lisette Ijssel de Schepper. She is a senior economist at the Bureau for Economic Research at Stellenbosch University.